Welcome to the NAHA webinar brought to you by the National Association for Holistic Aromatherapy. To learn more about NAHA, please visit www.naha.org. Tonight's presentation topic is South African Fynbos essential oils. This educational webinar is being presented by Dawn Langley Brady. Dawn has been a practicing nurse for 29 years. Her areas of expertise include pediatrics, holistic nursing, pain management, and hospice and palliative care. She is certified as a board-certified advanced holistic nurse and is also a certified clinical aromatherapist and a professional member of both NAHA and AIA. Dawn has been providing aromatherapy consultation services for 8 years as an independent practitioner and owner of Aromatherapeutic Solutions. She is an Augusta University College of Nursing faculty member and an AU Nursing PhD candidate, as well as a former member of AU's Georgia Cancer Center's Integrative Oncology Steering Committee. To learn more about Dawn, please visit her website at www.aromatherapeuticSolutions.com. And I'd like to just take a moment and welcome Dawn for being here this evening and sharing on this very unique topic that I am personally excited about. So you can go ahead and get started, Dawn. Thanks.
Thank you, Kelly. Good evening, everyone. Just a moment before we get started. I know when I've attended webinars in the past, it's been rushing home from work or trying to get the family fed and stuff. So if you are not driving, please don't do this if you're driving. Just try to take a couple deep breaths and relax and let all the stress of the day go away. And so we can enjoy this time together. Okay, so tonight we're going to be talking a little bit about South Africa and South African Fynbos essential oils. So how did this topic come to be? Well, 2 years ago, I was blessed with the opportunity to present an aromatherapy case study and related literature review at an International Nursing Research Congress that was being held in Cape Town, South Africa. Of course, South Africa is not easy to get to, and although it's not very expensive to be there, flights are very expensive. And NAHA graciously contributed to my travel. So I incorporated visiting an essential oil farm 2.5 hours outside of Cape Town, in addition to attending the Nursing Research Conference and giving my aromatherapy presentation. So hopefully by the end of this presentation, you will be able to explain a little bit about South Africa's history, the differing geology, list some common Fynbos essential oils, and examine how we as aromatherapists might positively impact the South African economy and subsequently their people. So we're not going to go into a whole lot of history, but just a little bit. So when we're thinking about the formation of our planet and Pangaea and has it broke into continents, there are fossils that link modern Homo sapiens living in South Africa for over 200,000 years ago. Some of the first peoples in South Africa consisted of San, Khoikhoi, and Bantu-speaking tribes from Africa. Many of those Bantu-speaking tribes come from more northern Africa and Middle African countries. And of course, as trade grew, ships were sailing around the world. It became very important for sailors coming from Europe to have somewhere to stop on their way to the New World, for food, for water, to get sources of vitamin C to prevent scurvy in the sailors. And around 1652, a permanent European colony was established in Cape Town, and that was strictly to support sailors from the Netherlands through the Dutch East India Company. And as with many horrific settlements, what happened in other places happened as well in Cape Town, and almost 80% of the tribal people died due to illness that was brought from the sailors. Now in 1815, most of South Africa was annexed by the British, and of course it fell under their rule, and the British monarchy continued to run South Africa until 1961. It was a long time. At that time, the country officially became a sovereign state, and they called themselves the Republic of South Africa. So, interestingly enough, during the last 25 years of British rule, apartheid was established. It was established in 1948, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with apartheid, but if you aren't, it was extreme racial segregation. So the minority, the Caucasian, European ancestry citizens of South Africa were the privileged, and the majority, unfortunately, became such that it was illegal to marry across races. It was illegal to congregate in areas that would mix races. So just like what the United States saw earlier in our history through the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and so forth, with our segregation fight, the fight against apartheid grew in South Africa. But unfortunately, the beginning of apartheid abolishment wasn't happening until 1991. I'm sure you remember the imprisonment of Nelson Mandela on Robben Island. I'll show you a picture of his cell in a little bit. But this was a really hard time for the country of South Africa. The wealth was held by just under 8% of the citizens, as well as the majority of the land ownership and the education. Luckily, by 1994, apartheid was completely abolished, and that was thanks to a lot of work by the African National Congress. So, interestingly enough, if we're looking at a capital of a country, the Republic of South Africa has 3 capitals, believe it or not. So each of their 3 branches of government, just like we have, they're now a voting democracy, and they had their first official 100% democratic election in 1994, where all citizens had equal right to vote. And the 3 branches of government that they have, each is in a different capital city. So we have Pretoria, Cape Town, and Bloemfontein. So being a very culturally and ethnically diverse country, South Africa officially has, recognized in their constitution, 11 languages. I could not imagine trying to speak all these living in a country. Of course, they have the English language, and we're talking about the British English. We have Afrikaans, and Afrikaans stem from the West Germanic language, Southern Dutch language from South Holland, because that's, of course, the first European colony that was established there was Dutch. And then that is used, the Afrikaans is used mostly for communication in and outside of the home with locals. The English, however, is used mainly in business and employment and relation with foreigners. Then they also have Zulu. Zulu is quite often spoken in the home and not out in the community. And then there's other languages such as Ndebele, Swati, Southern Soto, Northern Soto, Venda, Setswana, Zitunza, and Xhosa. So this is a picture of Nelson Mandela's cell. If you ever go to South Africa, please take the time to visit Robben Island. It's a short distance away off the coast, but there's a beautiful tour, and the tours are guided by former apartheid prisoners. So you get the full, rich story of what they experienced, how they were put there, how long they were kept there, and finally their release back into South African society. So I want you to enjoy a lot of visual aspects of South Africa. So this is a portrait or a picture I took. I actually got it blown up into an oil painting. It's very beautiful. The site that you can see from Robben Island, where all the apartheid opposition were held as prisoners. This is the view that they saw from their prison cells. Those that were lucky enough to be on the outskirts of the prison, not the interior of the prison. Just a daily reminder of home and that they can't get home. It was a really sad time in that country's history. So I wanted to share with you some statistics of South Africa, because considering that the World Bank has South Africa listed as an upper middle income economy, and they're the second largest economy in the continent of Africa, some of these statistics are really startling, especially to an American, thinking that people are living this way. Now, their population has approximately 56 million. Their education system ranks 75th out of the top 76 countries. Approximately 26% of South African adults are HIV positive. Approximately 47% of South Africans live in poverty. And out of that, about 1/4 the population, or 25%, are unemployed, and they live on the equivalent of less than $1.25 US per day. And when we look at the wealth and the land ownership in South Africa, approximately 78% of South African land is owned by the wealthy 8% of the population. Now in 2016, one of the last updates on their statistics is 29% of South African population was 14 years of age or younger. And unfortunately, when people have, or countries have, populations that are so young, there's a lot of turmoil, a lot of upheaval, political change, sometimes social unrest, because there's not enough of the mature adult that's well educated to bring that society along. We have a lot of young people, and think about, excuse me, the number of HIV positive adults and the number of children that are losing their parents and having to live in orphanages and so forth. Even worse, in my opinion, is they lead the world in the most inequality between races and rural and urban youth. This is inequality in wages, in housing, in education, and hopefully some of that will get turned around in the near future. On July 9th, our dollar, the US dollar, was equal to 13.42 South African Rand. So in the aromatherapy world, if we were purchasing South African essential oils, we would get them at far less cost than we would if we were purchasing from inside the United States or Europe and so forth. This is a picture of a little shanty town. I was hoping to get you a better picture off a video I took, but I was unable to, because most of these little towns, if you can imagine a tractor trailer. So our 18-wheeler, the huge metal trailer on the back of them, These houses are made of similar trailers, but they're about a third of the length, sometimes a fourth of the length, and they are stacked side by side by side. And some of these are miles long and miles deep. And these little towns have no running water and no electricity. They have metal roofs. There's no air. And thankfully, it doesn't get outrageously hot in South Africa, but it does get cold. And these families have very little means to keep themselves warm and secure. There's also a lot of crime in these areas. And this is where the majority of the South African non-white citizens are living. All of those that are living in poverty, the majority are living in these little shanty towns. So getting on to a little happier topic, let's look at some geology. So the South African geology is quite interesting. The region boasts desert, semi-desert, coastal and mountainous regions, a Mediterranean climate, which is great for growing things, and is a region dependent on mostly winter or summer rainfall. The South African temperatures average 63 degrees Fahrenheit in spring and fall, 72 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer. I don't know about you, but I'm in Georgia and I'd love a 72-degree summer instead of my 105, and 46 degrees Fahrenheit in the winter. I was fortunate enough to be able to visit, well, fortunate temperature-wise for me, but not fortunate because I didn't see as many plants as I would love to see when I went to South Africa, but the conference was in July, so it was in dead of their South African winter. But I think you will like some pictures of plants I was able to take on the tour. Winds, however, on the Western Cape can be quite strong. They average 16 miles per hour during most of the year, but can get quite windy. And some of the trees along the coast are kind of bent over at an angle because of all the constant barrage of wind. I didn't have a good picture of that to show you, but if you can imagine looking like the tree is going to fall over, but it's not, just because of the amount of wind that is blown on it. So most of the year, the average rainfall is about 18 inches. Unfortunately, the last 2 years, they've had a lot less rainfall than normal and are experiencing a lot of drought and water restriction. So this is a photograph of Cape Town, South Africa. And of course, for most foreigners, the mention of South Africa usually brings to mind the seaside city of Cape Town or dry, busy streets of Johannesburg. But I want to just give you a little different look of some different parts. This is a photograph of downtown Cape Town. This is a city of approximately 3.4 million people. This is one of the less busy streets that we were able to travel on, but it is quite populated, standard inner city, big buildings. Most people there, however, do not drive, at least not in the city. They take bus transportation and train. And then if you're driving along the highway near these big shanty towns, you will see quite often, have to be very careful driving because people will just run out across the highway. But groups of 10 to 30 people at a time racing across to get picked up by trucks and taken to their employment, because most of the people don't drive. And I can tell you that I wasn't going to try to drive, but I needed to drive for a couple days. And I don't even want to say this because it's embarrassing, but it's been it had been 20 years since I drove a manual transmission, and that's all they had. So I'm like, okay, wait a minute. I'm in a different hemisphere, different country. I have to drive on the opposite side of the road and try to drive a stick shift in the mountains. So it was quite challenging, but just getting the rental car back to where we were staying, I had to park up in this garage and I couldn't get it to go up the garage. And I asked the garage attendant for some help, and he said, well, I can't help you. I have to find someone that knows how to drive first. So it was quite interesting, the lack of people that know how to drive, even in the big city or the rural areas for that fact. Here's a great seaside town. I wanted to share a picture with you. It's a coastal town called Simonstown, surrounded by the mountains. There's mountains everywhere in South Africa. It's beautiful. And there's huge boulders all out onto the beach. And of course, it's home to our South African penguin colonies. And then here are our wineries. Interestingly enough, about, I think the last thing I looked at was 18% of wine that's sold in the world is now coming from South Africa. But unfortunately, this mass agriculture change is killing off a lot of the indigenous species, specifically the Fynbos that we're trying to save. But the wineries are stellar. This was a winery in a place called Rebecca Castile. And of course, it's nestled between mountains, and there's olive plantations and wineries everywhere. It's just gorgeous. You do on occasion, though, will see a wild baboon running down the street, and nobody in any of these areas ever eats outside. It's like, you mean I can't sit on the porch and have, you know, my dinner or a glass of wine? No, you cannot, because baboons will run in to wherever you are at any given time and take your food away from you, specifically if it's something that they really, really like. Now here is a photograph from an animal preserve showing some desert with some little bit of mountain terrain in the back. And this was about 2.5 hours southeast of Cape Town. You can see some zebra there as well. And of course, more baboon are in this area than are at the area with the wineries, but they are still near the wineries as well. So now to the good stuff, the South African Fynbos. So in the world, we have 6 floral kingdoms. The smallest floral kingdom and the richest per unit of area is actually the Fynbos. And when you compare that, it means there's more plants growing in the area of Fynbos than South American rainforest, which is hard to believe. And of course, Fynbos is both the name of all of these plants, the floral kingdom, and an area. So it's used multi-purpose, this word is, but it's an exceptionally biodiverse swath of native shrubland in the Western Cape of South Africa. Different texts will give you different information, anywhere from 8,000 to 9,000 Fynbos, of which approximately 6,000 are endemic. There are some plants that are considered Fynbos that are naturalized invasive species because they've been there so long. And we'll talk about those a little later. But Fynbos is actually a Dutch word for fine-leaved plant. And these are plants, they tend to thrive in very nutrient-poor, sandy soil with varied temperatures and rainfall, and of course the windy conditions. Currently, there's over 1,700 Fynbos listed as threatened or in danger of extinction. And currently the World Wildlife Foundation actually has several different programs enacted trying to help restore and preserve some Fynbos. So these are a couple of Fynbos. I thought you might like to see some. So one plant is here growing in between small little portions of a boulder. And the one on the left is actually a Fynbos that was growing at the essential oil farm that I toured. However, nobody knew what this plant was. Most of the South African people do not know the names of these. There are some botanists that have studied all the Fynbos and documented them, but most people just don't know each average plant that might be growing, even if it's right outside their door. In the back of the picture of Cape Town, you saw a big flat mountain. This is Table Mountain. Everybody that we met in South Africa talked about Table Mountain, how everybody is called to the mountain, and that everyone in Cape Town and the surrounding areas of South Africa should, at some point in time in their life, try to get to Table Mountain. It's like big ancestral stories about Table Mountain, and everyone should try to get there, but the majority of people we talked to had never gotten to go to Table Mountain. We were fortunate enough to go to Table Mountain, and these are a couple of photographs of Fynbos growing up Table Mountain. And again, in the rocks, in the boulders, almost 3,600 feet above sea level. And what's so interesting, on the left here is a photograph of when we got to the top of Table Mountain. There's a huge lift that takes people up. And what you're seeing in the very top of that picture is a cloud. We were in the cloud. At one point in time when we got to the top of the mountain, we couldn't see anything else but the mist in front of our faces because we were inside the cloud. It was the most amazing thing, and it was quite a lot colder up there, requiring hats and gloves and so forth, other than the winter temperature in the 46, 50 range down on the ground. And again, on the right, here's another picture, some stones and several different Fynbos plants growing to the left of the stone. If you ever get to South Africa, please, please go up on Table Mountain. You really won't want to come back down, but they warn you when you go up that if you get stuck up there when bad weather comes, or if it's too cloudy at the end of the day, they won't make the last run down, and then you'll have to hike down 3,600 feet in the dark, which is not anything I want to do. So where I toured is called Cape Mountain Oils, and it is in Porterdale, which is just past Reback Castile, where I showed you the winery was, but way up in the mountains, in the Groot Winterhoek Mountains. And just imagine, you know, the nice dirt road on the side of a cliff that is so small, you know, that we had to honk the horn continuously while we drove just to alert anybody that might be coming to please, please, please come very slowly so you won't knock us off the mountain. And when we finally got there, it was a huge sigh of relief that we could park the car and get out. And we were met by two wonderful, wonderful farm keepers, Yap and his wife, Stofelina, which is Cinderella in translating. But Cape Mountain Oils is on Rock Haven Farm, and it's in a big protected area at the top of these mountains where there's several farmers. And they do sell oils there on site. You can't order things online from them because they sell directly to essential oil companies, but were gracious enough to allow me to come and tour their farm. The owner, Andrew Brown, wasn't there at the time, but he had arranged with his farm keepers to let us on and show us whatever we wanted to see, which was absolutely wonderful. So I thought I was in heaven and I didn't want to leave. The first plant that we saw was African Cape Chamomile, or Eriocephalus punctulatus. And of course, that is in our Asteraceae family. Its common name is Bogokapop, and that's africanus. Of course, we're using the leaves and stem for steam distillation. If you've ever smelled African Cape Chamomile, oh wow, the plant smells absolutely just like it. by standing near it. You don't even have to rub anything on your hands and take a whiff. And it's such a beautiful, beautiful plant. The interesting thing here is it's harvested at the end of winter in South Africa. So characteristics, strong floral, does have a little chamomile-like, rich, sweet, warm. It smells a little like wine. A lot of middle notes to it. Some properties, it's anti-inflammatory, can help us relax, reduce our stress, boost our immune system. It's good for skin. Now, of course, I was about 2.5, 3 weeks prior to harvesting and distillation. And so there's none to be purchased, but the owner was gracious enough to sell me whatever he had left. So he sold me about 120 mLs of this beautiful blue African Cape chamomile and shipped it to me. Again, there's no safety concerns or contraindications that I was able to find with our African Cape chamomile. And here's a close-up view just because it's such a beautiful flower. I thought you might like to see a close-up view. And Yap was telling me that they have to be very careful. They want it to grow as long as possible so that they get the most essential oil yield from the plant. But if they start to see any of the little white petals begin to yellow, then they have to harvest it then so it won't go bad. It's a beautiful, beautiful plant. Next, we have a quite interesting one, African wormwood, or Artemesia afra. And this is in the Asteraceae family. It's got several different names like Lignana and Wildas, but I like African wormwood. I think that's my favorite. And I'm actually sitting here with all of my bottles in front of me so I can inhale them as I talk about them. But of course, this is again leaves and stem with steam distillation. It's got a deep resinous aroma. It's got a little camphorous, slightly sweet, woodsy, some middle notes to it. It's used in South Africa as an analgesic. It's for anti-hemorrhagic, anti-inflammatory, anti-malarial, rheumatic, antiseptic, anti-tuberculin. It is an emmenagogue, so of course you have to avoid it in pregnancy and breastfeeding. It does have potential neurotoxicity, so there are limitations to dermal use. Okay, now here's blue mountain sage. Now this is a variation of Salvia, so Salvia africana-caerula, and it is, of course, in the Lamiaceae family. But I love the names of Bluebum Sally or rough blue sage. This is one of the two plants that were originally non-native invasive species that have been there for so long that they call them a nice naturalized or domesticated non-native species. And steam distillation of leaves and stem. It has floral, herbaceous, rich, sweet scent. Little camphor in there, little spicy notes. Properties, we have anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, anti-malarial, antimicrobial. It is a gastrointestinal antispasmodic and antituberculin. It does oxidize very quickly, but I did not find any other safety concerns for our blue mountain sage. I know this isn't much of a picture. My apologies. It's the wrong time of the year to get great photographs of Buchu. But the interesting thing is the fence that's made all along here was to keep all of the animals out. And this particular farm had sheep and goats and a couple horses, dogs, etc. And of course, we know the baboons. But it's toxic for the sheep and the goat and the dog and the horses to eat this. So I was able to find two different Buchu. So we have Agathosma, crenulata, and betulina. And of course, the difference is one is a round leaf Buchu, and one's a long leaf, or sometimes called oval leaf Buchu. They are both used in, how to best describe this, perfumery and in the food industry. So things that need a black currant-like flavor, they can add some Buchu to. So they're both steam distilled from the leaves. They are both herbaceous, slightly spicy, slightly sweet. The crenulata has middle to top notes, whereas our betulina has middle to base notes. Betulina is antiseptic, antifungal, anti-inflammatory. It's a diuretic, it's a uterine stimulant, and of course, as a food additive, you to avoid during pregnancy and breastfeeding. And this, even though it's funny because it's used as a food additive, but then in all safety literature I can find it's just not for oral use. So the amount that they use in food additive is extremely, extremely low, the dilute amount. Crenulata and betulina have very, very similar chemical constituents, although the crenulata has a lot higher flagellum content. And this one's used primarily for the perfumery. Some food, but mostly in perfume. And that is why this farm had just started growing that recently. But they find out that Buchu tends to do a lot better if you don't harvest it every year. When they harvest it every year, they get very low essential oil yield, and the plant tends to take a long time to come back. But if they actually let it sit for a year, then harvest every other year, they have a better yield and lower bouillon. All right, and here's a very, very pretty one. This is called Cape May. Now, for those of you around New Jersey, it's not like my Cape May where I went to Coast Guard boot camp, but this is a delightful, delightful plant, Cape May. And this is Coleonema album, Rutaceae family. They call it Acebasi or bait bush, or white confetti bush, or wild Buchu, although it doesn't look anything like the leaves or the flowers of the Buchu we just talked about. Essential oils obtained from steam distillation of the leaves and the stems. It's very sweet, herbaceous, has a little hint of pepper to it, and mostly middle and top notes. It's analgesic, anti-anxiety, antiseptic, diuretic, insect repellent. Although when I smell it, it doesn't remind me of any other essential oil I use that helps repel insects. This is a bit sweeter to me. It's also as a deodorizer for deodorants and such. I could not find any hazards or contraindications for this. Everywhere does state, though, that it needs to really be stored in the refrigerator and used with antioxidants in blends. Oil is very, very limited availability. This is one of two oils that Andrew Brown was able to find for me, just a very, very small amount. I got about 5 mLs of Cape May because, of course, there's not as much essential oil to be found for sale there in the winter time. And then again, they don't produce a lot and it's harder to find. So Cape Snowbush, this is another really, really neat plant. So there were two species of snowbush that we saw. So we have Eriocephalus, africanus, and racemosus. And of course, these are the Asteraceae family, called wild rosmarin, strandcopopas, and kopaki. And steam distillation of leaves and stem from this plant. Characteristics are astringent, cool, herbaceous, a little camphorous, slightly spicy, mostly middle notes. And of course, our properties: analgesic, antidepressant, antifungal, anti-inflammatory, antispasmodic, antipyretic, diuretic. Of course, as I'm sitting here inhaling some snowbush, it's got such a neat little tingle in my nose. If you've ever smelled an essential oil, it feels almost like the end of your nose is kind of fuzzy when you finish smelling it. Hopefully, one day when I get done with this PhD, I'm going to do some research with snowbush because it's just such a neat feeling. And I'd like to see exactly what is working on the end of my nose to make it a little numb and fuzzy feeling when I inhale it. But it's a beautiful, beautiful scent. And of course, this is another one that's less available. And I found no hazards or contraindications with this. Now, but you see the one little flowering piece in the middle? Here's a close-up of that. It's fluffy. It feels almost like cotton. And it's just a lovely plant. And this is my favorite one to pronounce. So Hotnots Kooigoed. This is our African immortelle, or Helichrysum odortissimum, and from the Asteraceae family. It's also called Imphefo. But the one neat thing on the label for the bottle, it actually says Kooigoed, because people originally from South Africa will not let you call it anything else. This is the name. This is the go-to plant for anything that ailed them. They'll walk over, cut some, take it back in the house, cook it, steep it for teas and poultices and everything. And this was everything that they grew up with from the time as a child. They know what this plant is, where to find it, and how to use it. So, of course, this is a flowering plant. This is what we're going to use for steam distillation. It's astringent, balsamic, camphorous, herbaceous, middle to top notes, very similar to whatever Helichrysum you might currently be using. To me, it smells just slightly sweeter. Very similar properties: analgesic, antifungal, antimicrobial, immune stimulant, insect repellent, sedative, and I saw no safety concerns. Now we have khaki bush. So this was another one of the plants that was a domesticated, non-endemic plant. You know it as Tagetes, minutia, Asteraceae family. It's Khaki Bush or stinkbush, which is funny because the plant does smell a teeny bit stinky. The oil does not, but the plant a little bit. And they use aerial parts of flowering plant for steam distillation. Some characteristics: resinous, fresh green, herbaceous, slightly floral and sweet, some middle notes. Properties: it's antifungal, anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial, particularly against our MRSA that is very prevalent here in the United States. Antioxidant, anti-tumoral. There were some studies that showed cytotoxic against breast cancer cells. It's carminative, insecticidal. A lot of the indigenous peoples inhaled khaki bush smoke to help induce trance-like states. It can be phototoxic, and we should limit dermal use, and of course it oxidizes really quickly. But the khaki bush is a lovely, lovely scent, and quite interestingly enough, when you open the bottle, it's very similar to vetiver. Really thick, sticky, but quite wonderful scent. And of course, here's another plant, the domesticated non-indigenous plant, Rosmarinus officinalis. Of course, this is a chemotype cineole, but they do grow other types of rosemary. But again, they are not indigenous to South Africa. But this Rosemary Tuscan Blue, it's a Lamiaceae family. It's called Hotnots Imphefo. Let's say flowering plant. I think there's an error here. For some reason, I didn't catch that. It is not Hotnots Kooigoed. This is my Rosemary Tuscan Blue. I apologize for that. Did not catch that on the review there. but it is a softer, less camphorous smell. It's herbaceous, middle to top notes. This rosemary is analgesic, antibacterial, antifungal, antimicrobial. And of course, in one of my current studies, I'm using the same chemotype of rosemary for pain reduction. So analgesic aspect is very important to my work. It does have potential for neurotoxicity, and of course, some cautions in pregnancy and with infants and children. So when I went to South Africa, originally was going to tour 2 different essential oil farms. One is still pure. It's in Rebac Castile, where I showed you the wineries. But the day we went, they were moving a huge building across the farm, and it wasn't going to be ideal for anybody outsiders to tour. So we just toured the shop instead in town. Lovely little shop. And again, of course, there were not a lot of essential oils to pick from because it was winter and most things had been sold out. Now this is Cape Mountain Oils, where you saw the plant photographs from. And this is their distillation unit. It's a stainless steel unit. And Yap told me that it's about 40 pounds of dry plant material that would fill this still at any given time after harvest. This is the little shop that they have there. If you ever find yourself down in South Africa with a few days extra to spare, think about going up past Porterville and the Groot Winterhawk Mountains, because they do have little, I don't want to call them cabins because they're not made out of wood like our traditional cabin would be, but similar cabins, or you can camp. I don't know if I'd want to camp with the baboons and then wanting to take food all the time, but they do allow campers, and they do have some classes and weekends where people can come up and just enjoy the harvest and the distillation there. And this is just an interior shop wall. I love all the shops there are just so quaint and minimalistic, natural to the area, just beautiful. And I do want to tell you about this. There are some plants, and of course, geraniums derived mainly from Africa. So all of our geraniums, so those fit in the indigenous plants. But I didn't want to sit and talk about all geraniums. I think you're very familiar with a lot of the geraniums. There's a lot of lemon geranium, peppermint geranium, rose geranium, those sorts that come from South Africa. There was a plant. I'm sorry, can you see this? Are we all good, Kelly?
We're good. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry, this is plugged in. I don't know why it's saying my battery's about to die. I hope we can get through this here without it all dying. But this is just one of the last slides. Stofelina was telling me that her favorite plant ever was an orange geranium. And so she let me smell it, and and I'm sorry, it just died on me. Can you still hear me though? Are we good?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So she wanted to give me a clipping of this plant.
Oh, I think we lost you now. Okay, everyone, I think that we lost Dawn. Her battery looked like it popped up that it was dying even though she had it charged. So I don't know if there was some technicality. I was waiting to see if she would sign back in, but I do know that this was her last slide that she wanted to share some information on about the wonderful smell of this particular plant. So we will end the recording. Okay, I'm restarting the recording and we are on the lemon sour geranium slide. So Dawn is going to go ahead and pick up where she left off there.
Okay, I sincerely apologize about that. I don't know what happened. My laptop was plugged in and it just decided it was going to die without being on the docking station here in my office. And I've never had that happen. So perfect opportunity for things to go wrong, right? Anyway, the neat thing about this lemon or sour geranium, we're really not sure exactly what to call it. When Yap and Stopolina were taking us around the farm, she took me to a little area, it was enclosed, where they were trying to grow some things, like there was a soursop and a few other things that were indigenous to the area that they really hadn't had a lot of success with yet, but were trying to grow. And she said this was her absolute favorite. And it was a very small plant, and that we just rubbed the leaves and smelled. It was the most heavenly orange smell I had ever experienced. And so she said, "You like it?" And she took me out gallivanting across the farm to this one plant. So this is what she called in her africanus an orange geranium. However, when I got back to the States and I was researching, I couldn't find an orange geranium anywhere. And I had emailed Andrew Brown, the farm owner, and he said, well, sometimes the translation from Afrikaans to English is a little off, and she probably meant more of a lemon or a sour lemon, but I didn't smell any lemon, just this beautiful orange. And it was so funny because she kept trying to give me some to take home to grow, and I said, well, I don't think it will survive the 21 hours back home, and or let me get through customs with it. And then she started to show me how I could just take some and put it in my bra. But I really did not want to get held up in customs in South Africa for trying to smuggle out some geranium leaves. But anyway, I thought I would share that picture with you, and maybe at some point in time they will have success. They don't get a big essential oil yield, and when they cut it back for harvesting, according to Andrew, he quote unquote it sulks for a while and it doesn't want to grow. It takes a while to grow back, so they really haven't had success in that yet. So maybe one day we'll be able to see some of our lemon sour or orange, whatever it's going to be called, geranium. And I wanted to, 2 years ago when I was there, I was thinking how neat it would be if we could support local farms and their essential oils. Then perhaps there would be more farms and resulting in more jobs for a better economy and less poverty. Some of the farms up there, not particularly the one I went to, but some of the even more agricultural farm crops and so forth, they actually have homes on the farms for their employees, and the farm owners pay for the farm workers' children to go to school because school is not free. All that they ask is maybe perhaps someone has 6 children and they pay for all 6 children to go to school, that after they graduate from high school, that hopefully one of them will remain and help work on the farm as their job. But in the last year, a lot of unrest is happening in South Africa, and they're looking at maybe taking away all land from any Caucasian landowners and giving it to the indigenous or former indigenous lines of people in the country. So now I think we just kind of have to kick back and wait and see what happens. because it might end up in some big civil unrest in the country. We're not sure. I wish I had happier news to pass along, but I would love to go back sometime. I'd love to work with the farmers and the plants, and especially the Fynbos, and most of them have not even been researched as far as any kind of essential oils and healing properties other than their traditional Fynbos medicine practitioners that live in the very mountainous and rural areas. It would be a great, great place to learn and to see what benefits mankind could receive from these plants. And then, of course, I was fortunate that NAHA helped pay for my trip, and so did my graduate school and my College of Nursing. And you can't really see, this is a really bad selfie, but this is Stopolina next to me. And yeah, her husband, they both manage the farm, and of course she manages the shop. And to the far right, the really tall ones, my 26-year-old Ryan, and the younger one there, the you see piece of his face is my now 20-year-old son Alex. But when he found out I was going to be able to go, he was getting ready to graduate high school and begged to go. So he asked everybody he knew, don't give me any graduation gifts, just give me money so I can go to South Africa and see this as well. And then, of course, my older son hopped in and said, I'm not letting both of you go to another continent without me to make sure you're safe. So we were very blessed and got to go, and absolutely had more fun in this essential oil farm than I think we did anywhere else on our 10 days there in South Africa. But I hope you've enjoyed a little bit, and maybe looking at some of the scenery and some of the plants that hopefully you'll want to go visit one day as well. And thank you for joining me. Sorry again about the technical difficulties.
Well, thanks so much for this wonderful presentation on a very unique topic, I'm sure, for many of us that haven't experienced using these oils. I've used a couple of them, so we appreciate you sharing your experience there, as well as some of the history lesson is too. So I'm going to go ahead and stop recording, but wanted to thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me.